Hi, and welcome to When I Grow Up, the podcast dedicated to uncovering and celebrating unique paths to fulfillment and joy in our work lives. Today, I've got the pleasure of speaking with Evie Naufal. Now, Evie is a total badass. She is the Managing Director of DSC, Australia's leading NDIS educators, but she also happens to be my best friend and one of my biggest cheerleaders. We met when we studied our master's degree together in 2012 in Paris. Coming out of business school, we applied for a consulting project together at Procter Gamble, for which we moved to Brussels, and our project was actually based in Kenya. And so not only did we get to have lots of fun together in Europe, we also traveled to Kenya quite often. We'll get into some of that in today's conversation. We look at how she made her early decisions around what to study. We unpack that first really formative work experience at Procter Gamble and just the fantastic people we worked with there. We reflect on her decision to move back to Australia and build the company of which she's currently managing director. We think through a little bit about what her experience has been like following her dad as managing director and stepping into her own authentic leadership style, and what it's like to actually run a company with your family. Towards the end of the conversation, we also get into the unique work culture and way of working that they have at DSC, which I think is something that many leaders can take inspiration from. So I absolutely love this conversation, and I'm really excited to share Evie with you all for a little while. Hi, Evie. Welcome to When I Grow Up.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I was thinking this morning what makes me most excited about this interview or this conversation. And I was like, how fucking cool is it that you get to come on my podcast after like our whole journey together?
Yeah, and a lot of different work iterations for us both too.
I'd love to hear a little bit about, just kind of your early years, how you grew up, and whether there was like any kind of like ideas you had about your career, what you wanted to do, and, how did you end up in Paris, basically? Take us back and take us there.
When I was younger, I wanted to be a journalist, I guess, or a writer of some kind. Like I was always like a big reader, and I always had these like notebooks full of these stories, which are like so fun but so cringy to find and reread, these like creative stories that I wrote when I was a kid. But I always had this fantasy of being a writer. And so I studied media and communication in uni, and within like 3 months realized I did not want to be a writer because like the reality of being a journalist or a writer is quite different to the fantasy. But how I ended up in Paris nonetheless is kind of like a similar story to a lot of what influenced my early career, which was like decisions that led me closer to boys that I was in love with that didn't live in Australia. And so I did an exchange in Sweden in my undergrad. I met a Dutch guy. We were going to go back to Sweden and study together. And he was really set on doing this degree in the same town where we'd met. And in looking at the options that I had to study there, I decided to do sustainable business because I discovered through all the careers fairs that nobody wants to hire someone with a media and communications degree. They want to hire people with business degrees. And the only business degree I could get into was sustainable business. So like I love to pretend I was like this big eco warrior and it was this values driven decision. But the reality is like I was in love with a guy who wanted to go to that uni, and the only business course I could get into was sustainable business. So I applied to that, and then they cancelled the program. But in the time that had passed since I'd applied, I'd started to really grow attached to the idea of doing sustainable business. And so then I was researching other degrees. This was back in, I want to say like 2012. So it was kind of quite an early part of the social enterprise sustainable business movement. And there wasn't a lot of options. And so the option that I ended up going with, where we met, was studying in Paris.
Yeah, I love that, firstly, because I think it's like, how do powerful women make decisions? And probably if we had to write something about it or whatever, like it's maybe, there's always like the on the CV version, and then there's like the real version. So absolutely love that. Curious, because you said like in that period that passed, you actually really got like, you kind of like felt convinced then of this idea to study sustainable business. Like what happened in that period that convinced you?
I think I'd started to research sustainable business and was really seduced by these like now like archetypal case studies of businesses where they're doing good and making money. And it just seemed like at the time, I remember I had a really lefty friend who told me like, capitalism isn't going to save the world, Evie. But I was kind of like, maybe it could. I don't know if I still feel this way,
Yeah.
but I remember being like really seduced by those stories.
At that time, there was these big ideas about business and about impact. And I think business school seemed like the logical kind of like next step. Like if you want to go into that field, it's interesting how you downplay it. Oh, it's just the only one you could get into, just the best business school in Europe. But anyway, so what did you take from that experience, from your business school experience?
The truth is I hated it. I hated our degree while I was doing it. I was really miserable. And I think part of the issue is that I was a bit of an insecure perfectionist, and business schools are like designed to make you work really, really hard. Like there's a prestige just in how hard it was. And a lot of the time it felt meaningless. It was like, just do another PowerPoint presentation in a group of 4 summarizing a paper. And a lot of the time I just got so sucked into it of like needing to perform really well in these tasks that I found meaningless. At the same time, I was working really hard. And so honestly, one of the biggest things I took away from business school in retrospect was how much I missed of the experience because I was so caught up in being so miserable and angry about it. And so we're really lucky that our cohort are very close and includes like at least a dozen people who are like those magical social cogs or like they make things work. And so they continue to organize reunions and keep in touch. And so I've been lucky enough that even though I kind of squandered the opportunity of having these 40 people from all around the world who were so values aligned and so interesting and so intelligent, though I kind of feel like I squandered the opportunity at the time, I've had the opportunity since to like reconnect and to still like really benefit from my connections with them. And of course I have you. But probably that was a really big lesson for me in like just letting the need to be the best like really take over my well-being. And so honestly, like that's probably not exactly what you're asking about, what I learned at business school, but like 10 years later now that it is, that's like the biggest thing that I think of when I think about that experience. And what I would do really differently if I had my time again would be to approach it with like more control and take what I wanted to take out of it and just like really immerse myself in the parts of it that were super interesting to me, to connect with the people who were there, and to just kind of like be okay with getting like C's and D's in the tasks that I felt were meaningless.
That resonates with me so much because I think, to get into a program like that, you obviously are picking, kind of the top achievers or the overachievers, or at least, people that has that drive. And so I think, you weren't the only person I think had a similar experience. It somehow seemed from the outside like everyone else was just having a great time and having fun and getting the most out of it. I'm wondering if we asked them the same question, if they had a similar experience. But yeah, I always like think if I could go back now with like kind of the confidence I have and, how different that experience would be.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't say it didn't help me at all. Like it definitely gave me a solid foundation of like business acumen, not to a particularly deep level, but with enough like general knowledge that's now hugely beneficial in my role. So I'm sure it kind of didn't feel that way at the time, but I do think my like mindset, attitude, soft skills are very different now than they would otherwise have been.
So what do you remember about then that first job we had? How do you remember us actually getting that job? And, for me, that was a super formative experience. And I'm curious what you took from that P&G role.
So what I remember about us getting the job is that we had to have an internship as part of the degree we did. And you could either find your own or some opportunities were presented to the class. And like periodically the program director would come and say, here are some opportunities that companies have presented to us. If you're interested, you should apply. And at the end of one of these sessions, she was like, oh yeah, and I've been a little bit in touch with someone from Procter Gamble who maybe has a project in Kenya on sanitation and social enterprise. I've got another meeting with her next week, so I'll keep you in the loop. And I turned to you and I was like, we are getting that internship. That is for us. And so before the program director had even had the second meeting or presented the opportunity back to the class, you and I had put together like a pitch for why we were the perfect person for people to do this internship. And it worked. And we got the internship. And that was like, you know, you have these internships where it's about photocopying and making coffee. And that was not this internship. Like from day dot, what still strikes me about this experience is the respect that we were given by the people that we worked with. Like we were reporting to somebody who was 4 levels above us in the food chain, like really close to the top. And he would ask our opinions as if like he really cared. And that was such a formative experience for me to have a manager who really cared about what I thought about and like fostered me to kind of like share my ideas, which is just so rare so early in your career. And I think after that, I wasn't really willing to go back to a traditional junior role where it was like, you know, you sit, you observe, you wait your turn to have any kind of input.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, what a phenomenal person. I think about that often as well. And I just wanted to like sense check my memory because I was like, we were pretty deliberate in actually getting that. And I think like that was also exceptional at the time because we both, I think, were a bit insecure perfectionists, as you say, but somehow together, like we could bring together this, you know, you call it vision, call it delusion. I don't know what you want to call it, but that is going to be a cool internship. We think that's going to be, you know, like it sounds like something impactful, something we'd love to do. And we are perfect for it. Now let's put forward our case. And I love that, like together we could have that, you know, kind of like bolster each other.
That definitely like characterizes a lot of what we were like at the time. Like there was another time about a year later. So after the internship, we were then hired for a year to continue the project. And we were working on the project and we just like weren't getting the cut through that we needed with the other stakeholders. And so we were like, well, we're just going to write a business plan. And then within the space of like 4 days, we just like decided it's our job to write the business plan and delivered it to them as like, you're welcome. Like us 21, 22-year-olds have written your business plan. And we just expected to be taken seriously. But at the same time, how cool to be working with people who then like give you the space to be that bolshy that like, you're going too far, but you're still getting the opportunity to go far enough that you're really growing.
Yeah, I think that's the cool thing about it. It's both that they had the confidence in us and gave us the respect, but that they also indulge so much. Like now that I'm much older and, you know, also have managed people like at the start of their careers, I'm like, wow, you know, there must have been times when they thought like, girls, geez, like... And, you know, I think they must have found it amusing as well, but they indulged us and they gave us that space to learn. And, you know, it's such a long-term view. And I think a lot of that team, they're still there and they had this long-term view of where that team was even going. But it was also a long-term view on our development. And I don't know if they thought about it consciously, but also trusting us to reflect back and learn those lessons in retrospect and not having to kind of teach us everything like on the go. Yeah, I love that.
Oh, I just wanted to say too, like that manager I was talking about who believed in us so much, that was a man and we were 2 young women early in our career. And it's not lost on me like how much of a gift that was. Like I think a lot of young women earlier in their careers could spend an extra decade doubting themselves and having that kind of imposter syndrome. And no doubt we showed up to the role arrogant. But to have a manager who believed in us to that extent, who like cultivated that kind of confidence, like that was just such a gift. And I keep meaning to tell him. I have to email him one day, but that's, yeah, a big gift of my career.
Well, what we'll do is we'll tag him in this episode and he'll listen to it, and this is going to make me emotional. So let's go on to the next question, because it actually made me think now when I was saying that long-term view of that team. And what I mean with that, maybe just for context for people, is that we had our internship. There wasn't kind of a sustainability team at the time. So it was maybe like a handful of people that, you know, in their regular day-to-day roles had this vision around sustainability, and they started building it into, you know, the R&D that they were doing, the go-to-market, the packaging. We then came to a juncture like 18 months into this project that we were doing that, it became time to be like, okay, it's wrapping up now, project's finishing up. Do we feel that we have a future with this company? And, they were, of course, very open to us staying on in various roles, but it wouldn't be 100% the sustainability project we were doing. And both of us made the decision to actually move on then. And so I'm curious if to just unpack that a little bit with you, like, how did you make the decision to not stay with the company? And, because we were happy, we loved the team, we loved the work, we loved being there together. So it must have been quite a big decision at the time to decide to move on.
Yeah, for me, it was more a decision about moving home than it was about leaving Procter Gamble, because at that point I'd been overseas for 5 years. I'd been in a different country each year, and it was starting to grind on me, the expat life. And just like, I remember saying at the time, like, I just want someone to ask me to pick them up from the airport or help them move house. Like, I want the kind of depth of friendship where like someone will want to inconvenience me. And I'd been away from when I was like sort of 19 to 24, and my friends were starting to get married and have their own lives. And I just started to feel like if I don't go home now, I'm not going to have a community to go home to. And so that was probably why I chose to leave, though I would have loved to stay. And if there had been an opportunity equally exciting in Australia to work with P&G, I would have happily taken it, but it's a much smaller office here.
I get that. I can imagine being in Europe, like, because I'm in Australia now, of course, it's like a world apart from everything. Like, it's far, but when you're here or when you're there, and it's really fucking far. So what was that landing back after that, like, super full on Europe/Africa experience? What was the landing back home like?
Well, this is another one of those ones where, so right before I left, so I decided to leave Belgium, planned to leave Belgium. 2 weeks before I left, I met a Belgian guy. So my return home was brief because I wanted to go back to Belgium again immediately. And I knew at the time it was temporary, but I kind of arrived home for a few months and then went back. So brief is the answer to that question.
But then you came back. So maybe let's keep the backpack, the boy, because finally he came back with you to Australia and you kind of settled back home. Was the idea always that if you come back home that you and your dad would start the business? Was that always kind of the idea, or what did you think your next kind of career step would be?
No, so what happened is I came home and I mean, Procter Gamble, one of the things they're really famous for is consumer research, and I'd really loved that side of things. So I'd come home and got a grad job in a decision-making science company that I had let them know I would start. I think it was like 3 or 6 months later when I'd come back from Belgium the second time. And in that time that I was back in Australia, my dad and his wife were starting to think about doing the business that we now run together today, and they needed a website. And so my dad and I made a deal where he gave me $5,000 to pay for my return to Belgium, and in return I would build the website. So while I was back in Belgium, I was starting to build the website for this company, and then eventually I came home. I started the job with the decision-making science company. Within 6 weeks I'd quit because it was just such night and day from my experience. Like, in terms of the respect I was given, it was a lot of like, shut up and wait your turn till we ask for you to say something. And I was like, I'm too big for this now. So I quit and started to line up another job in management consulting. And it was at that point that I'd started to become more involved in the work that my dad and his wife were doing, and started to really love it. And I kind of hit like a fork in the road where it was like, do I want to go take this grad job I've got in management consulting, or do I want to continue to work in this business for my dad? Which, like, as you can imagine, this person who had gone to business school and had this prestigious internship and worked for an American multinational, like, the idea of working in my dad's, home small business was, like, in a way horrifying. But I had this experience where, so we work in the disability sector. We support disability support organisations to do what they do better, basically, and navigate government policy. And I had this experience where we went to a disability service provider, and it was this beautiful organisation, and I was hearing the support workers talk about the work that they do and the connection that they have with people. And it was so clear to me from the outside that the work they were doing with people was so meaningful, and had, like, the high regard that they spoke about people with was just like really new for me. Suffice to say, I was really impressed by them. And then they were saying, yeah, but we do that well, but we can't do marketing and like we can't do finances. And I was like, oh, I can do that. Like, I don't know that I could do what you do, but I can bring this piece. And so it was this like cool experience of seeing that actually I could bring my previous experiences and it would be really valued here. And so, yeah, I took a leap of faith. And 10 years later, I'm very, very, very glad I did.
We started out at like the beginning of like going to business school and seeing this like maybe business can be the answer, to solving some of the problems in the world. And here you see a business that is working towards that you respect, and you're like, oh, well, actually, we can also build a business that helps these type of companies and organizations. And it's been 10 years of building this business with your dad. What has the last 10 years been like?
It's been such a journey, honestly. So we've gone from being a business of three to four people to now 35 people, and 35 is like where we've been for about 4 years. It's kind of like our sweet spot. Yeah, the greatest gift of my career to work with my dad and his wife. I think it's like a really unique experience to get to work with family. The first few years, there was a lot of conflict. I mean, probably the first 10 years, there was a lot of conflict, but with time, like we've learned to have a different relationship to the conflict. Like it's a more creative conflict now. It's something we really value in our work that doesn't distress us in the same way that it did at the start. But it's so unique to have people who are going to tell you exactly what they think of you all the time. And also to like kind of develop the skill of like filtering that of like, is this my dad being full of shit and this is a dad-daughter thing, or is this like valid feedback that as a manager no one else would have dared to give me, but now I have the opportunity to receive. And beyond work too, just because my dad and I are both very work-oriented people, to have had the opportunity to get to know that side of him and for him to know this side of me, like that's the best there is.
That's so special. I don't think my dad knows what I do at any point in time ever. So I just find that relationship with your dad so special. I'm curious, like what made the difference in, there's always like the storming, forming, norming, whatever, that you do in a business sense, but there's kind of boundaries around it because you colleagues, you don't know each other that well, you can get fired and so on. Whereas like you guys can just let loose. Like, what was the key in getting the relationship to a stage where you get the best out of it and you get that kind of like direct feedback?
Vanessa, my dad's wife, 100%. It would not have lasted as long as it has without her. She's just like 100. She's spent so long with both of us individually together, mediating, helping us better understand ourselves and each other. I think we've both done a lot of coaching as well. So we've both like really taken the time to understand what parts of the dynamic are really fruitful and how to work with it, and also how to like work with each other's shortcomings. And then both of us being willing to like do the work and like really giving a shit about our business and our relationship.
A couple of years ago, you took over the role as managing director from your dad. And that must have been like a huge shift in the dynamic and the way you do things. What was that like? And what do you think made it hard? And what was the kind of the key to you to step into your own leadership, like in a very authentic, Evie way?
So it's a good question. My journey to becoming managing director was kind of like not very well planned, because like for a long time my dad had been saying like he wanted to step back and he wanted me to step up, and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. Like the fun of this business is to work together. I don't want you to step back. And then, so a few years ago, I went from being an employee to one of the business owners. And we had this meeting with my colleague who had just been promoted. And so we were kind of saying, oh, well, her title could be deputy manager and Evie could be managing director. And I got like a rush of blood to the head and I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. I want to be managing director. And we got off the call. And then my dad called me and he's like, oh, I just wanted to know like what's changed for you, because like whenever we've talked about you taking over and me stepping back in the past, like you haven't wanted to. And I was like, what? Is that what I just agreed to? And I was like, I just didn't really think it through at all. And anyway, we continued with this, but I think probably for the first 6 months of being in the role, I was kind of like resisting it. I was really like, you guys always leave me in charge of everything. And it's like, yeah, because you're in charge of everything now. But I was really like, resisting like the buck stopping with me and really wanting my dad and Vanessa to like parent me more a bit. Like, I'm sure that's part of what was like occurring, is like I was thrown out of the nest and kind of like acting out a little bit. And also like feeling like I had this, like, what the fuck does a managing director do? Like I didn't know. I'd been really acing my like, making this particular part of the business perform, but I didn't know how to be like a leader and care about everybody in the organization and demonstrate that and do all this stuff that felt really out of my comfort zone. And I think it's a good question about what changed. It's something I'm going to have to think about, but I just know it was kind of like a few months after that we ran a massive conference. It went really well. And one of my colleagues said to me, like, I just addressed the whole team at the end of it and gave them a big like congratulations and thank you. And somebody said to me, like, I can really see you're Evie, the managing director now. You're not like Evie, Roland's daughter, or you're not like hiding under anyone's shadow. Like, you know what you're doing. You're in charge of this show, and like it's really coming across. And I was like, thank you so much. But I really felt it then too. But I don't know what changed other than maybe giving myself permission to not be this like perfect managing director that I also didn't know what it looked like.
It must have been scary because also, you had, of course, jobs before you stepped into this role, but most of your career has actually been in this company that you, the three of you and the team, have been building bottom up. So you don't really have a model of like what to copy or like what's the right way to do this, and kind of have to figure it out for yourself.
I think it was really just that, not knowing what success looked like not knowing what it really meant to be a good managing director, feeling really insecure about that, not knowing how to answer it. And so kind of just like acting out against it. But I will say like that is a recurring theme in our leadership team over the last decade, is like that we give ourselves these big titles, or, it's like, this is how we're going to work as directors. And then we kind of flail a little bit until we have conversations where we more clearly like express our expectations of ourselves and of each other. And often it's like then a switch is flicked, and it's like, okay, if I kind of know what's expected of me, then I can deliver on it. But it's like that ambiguity, I think, probably caused a lot more distress than it needed to.
Just reflecting it from like a different perspective, because I've been, working with you and the leadership team on some of the strategic topics in the business. And I think I've said to you often is that you guys actually know what to do. Like, you actually have a really clear vision, and you say, okay, let's go into this exercise, let's figure out. But I think that also comes from a lot of care and wanting to do the right thing by people and wanting to do things in a good way. And so it's that balance of like having that confidence on your vision and how you want to do things, and having that intuition that this is the right way to do things, but having that checks and balances in place.
I think it was like also for me that like managing director felt like training manager plus caring about everybody. Like, which is not to say I didn't care about everybody before. I love our team, and I've always like really cared about our team, but it came with a sudden sense of responsibility for like their well-being at work and their enjoyment, and like it's, as you can probably tell from the way I'm describing this, like I've never felt that was a strength of mine. Like I've never known how to like authentically show up and be there with people and do all the culture stuff, because I'm such an introvert myself. I'm like, do we have to do all this like social stuff? That, I don't know, that felt like really uncomfortable. And so then maybe that was like a big insecurity that was playing out.
And how do you feel about that now?
It's definitely still something I'm working on, but I'm also learning to draw more on the other people in the team for whom that is a strength. Like, it's something that I value but don't feel like I'm performing that well. So when there are people in the team who are like those real natural organizers and givers, then I try to do anything I can to support that kind of stuff. Is that a cop-out? Maybe. I delegate it, basically. I delegate it and still try to figure it out. I know what it looks like when I'm doing it well, but I don't always know how to replicate that.
Yeah, I find that an interesting reflection, because if I and this is actually where I wanted to segue to, so it's the perfect segue to it, is around how you do things as a business. Like, you didn't have this template, you do things that feels, feels like the right thing to do. And, reflecting on my corporate experience, and, there's so much of like, this is the way things should be. This is the way we work. This is the way people collaborate. This is what it looks like if a day is productive and effective. And in a sense, you didn't have that brainwashing. And I think like if we want to call it that, you've set up your ways of working as a company quite differently.
So, I mean, that's really thanks to Roland and Vanessa. They both are super interested in organizational design and culture. It's like big passions they brought, largely informed by the fact that they had really shitty work experiences, not in corporate, but in these like crazy making nonprofit organizations. And so they wanted to do things really differently at DSC, which is our business. And so I think like how we see that play out in our business is that, we have really limited bureaucracy, probably not enough bureaucracy sometimes. Like we're a very relational culture. It's like if you want to know how something works, you can ask somebody. And it's all about kind of like people bring their own expertise and then they drive their own workload. And that's facilitated by the fact that we're a contractor model. And so, people bring the subject matter expertise that they have. They pitch to us the kind of training that we want to run. We platform it, they run it. And so everybody's kind of an respected expert in their own domain, which is, I think, quite unique. To answer the question about how it might have been different if I'd been brainwashed by a corporate, I think the thing is I was brainwashed by Dad and Vanessa. So I was lucky that the brainwashing I had was one that like, and now it matches my values because they gave me these values. But I think like, if I'm all jokes aside, I think I'm really grateful to have had leaders who really see work as an opportunity to develop the self, to and who have this like idea of work-life balance. That's the cool thing about running a business with family, is it's like we want the same standards for everyone else that we have for ourselves. And so that means feeling good at work. It means doing work you're actually interested in. It means like having the time off when you need to and that kind of flexibility. And so I think it's a real privilege as a leader to be able to lead an organization where those are the business imperatives. And it's not so much about like productivity, outcome, maximizing results. It's like success is defined by doing work that we find meaningful, that the people we're working with find meaningful, and that people are generally fairly happy at work.
The way you've set up things, where you don't have an office, people work remotely, they choose the projects and things that they want to engage on. It gives people so much autonomy and freedom. And, I get that doesn't work for, or wouldn't work for everyone, let's say. But, as an organization, I feel like respect for the authenticity of the person, what they bring to the table, what they find interesting, but also that they have a life and this fits within that life. And I was just thinking like, coming out of COVID, that was kind of like the wish, I think, like of mine and so many people, is we have seen now actually people can work from home. They have a life, they can do a load of laundry and then come back to a meeting, or, maybe not work so much in a particular day because something's happening at home or someone fell ill, and then come back and do like a really like fucking amazing job. And you recognize that that's the full human experience. Maybe if I just may do like a quick reflection, because I did have a lot of the I don't want to call it brainwashing, because a lot of it does work, right? Especially if you're in a very big, structured, complex organization. But I think one of the things that I've really appreciated working with the three of you and, the rest of the team is it's a lack of bureaucracy, but it's not making things complex for the things of making things complex, and like kind of creating work, like work creating work. And that's one of the things that I've had to, unlearn, but I've also seen, one or two other people that's been brought in from a more corporate environment, is distill it down to what's important and what needs to happen and what's the best way to make it happen. And, I love to start with a Gantt chart and a to-do list and a, structure and a PowerPoint of the plan. And like 2 weeks in, I've got this whole amazing plan. And, when I follow through on the plan is going to be great. But actually in that 30 minutes where I thought about what needs to happen, I could figure it out. And that's actually instilled like a new habit now that I don't do a to-do list or a plan like for anything I want to do, like even for this podcast. It's like I call it the what needs to be true list. And it's kind of like inspired a little bit from like how I saw you do your planning. So it's like, I want to have a podcast, what needs to be true. And these are the things that I need to do, and I do them, and then it's done. And again, that won't work in all environments, but I think that's such an inspiration, that to like just strip down all the like busy work making and like just get stuff done. And that's how you free up a lot of time and do super impactful stuff at the same time.
Well, that's so lovely to hear.
Maybe like just, kind of segueing, a little bit into like a forward looking, picture. I think one thing that a lot of us struggle with is making decisions that's like solid and correct even for the future. Like in our career, like, whenever we take a next step, does that line up to some future that is an ideal outcome? How do you think about that as an MD of your business? What's next? Is it building this business into the future? Or do you think about that?
I don't really think about it, to be honest. Like, we've always said, because our business was born at the birth of a massive change in the way that the Australian government funded disability services. That program was changing so rapidly in the early days of our business. And so we used to say like 6 months ahead, that's really long future planning for us. And now, I mean, there's still a lot of changes to that government policy, but our business is more stable. But it's kind of still the way we work, is we just kind of figure out what we're doing one step at a time, and we learn from what we're doing. We try it a little bit differently the next time. Personally, I don't have any ambitions for growth for our business because, like, the number of people we've got is great. I think we're doing really well. Like, I don't really have any ambitions for us to be any bigger than we are. I think our team do a great job of like continuously improving what they're doing. So I think like as a manager, my focus is more on just kind of like these more incremental gains and just like slowly working with what we've got than any kind of like, star in the sky, let's all get there together. It's maybe not very inspiring, but the truth is like, we're doing good. Let's keep doing it.
I love that. And there's not that, we were just chatting earlier about how I did this personality test and I scored quite embarrassingly high, I think, on being neurotic. And I don't sense that. There's like a calm and like a confidence in what you're doing, and, trust that as things unfold, you'll adapt to it.
Yeah.
You don't need to have all the answers today. Kind of the overarching theme of this podcast is looking at, different and unique journeys to fulfillment and joy in work. When you hear about that, finding fulfillment and joy in work, what comes up for you?
Yeah, for me, I would say like, do not be seduced by prestige. Like, especially I think early in your career, if you've got a personality type like ours, it's so easy to be drawn to like the company with the like most exciting brand that you're going to go to parties and you're going to tell people what you do, and they're going to be like, oh wow, you do that. And everyone I've known who've had opportunities like that, it's just so hollow. Like, that's not going to keep you warm at night. It's not going to be exciting. And the truth is, like, a lot of the time those companies are paying you in that prestige, and so they get away with treating you poorly or not having this like exciting job or the kind of pay you are deserved because you're doing a job that when you tell people about it at parties they say wow. And so that feels like the fork in the road I chose when I chose to work for my dad. And I mean, now it's exciting to be like, I'm the MD of a business that we've grown over 10 years. But like at the time, it was like, I work for my dad and my stepmom. And, I do the websites and I make the name tags for workshops and like stuff that wasn't glamorous, but it built to where I wanted to be. And it gave me this experience of work and life that, like, I keep saying is one of the biggest gifts of my life. So that would be what I think of when I think about different pathways to fulfillment. It is not via the road that people say wow at parties about.
Totally resonate with that, but that's a story for another episode, I think. What is the antithesis of that then? Like, don't get sucked into the prestige. Like, what does it come down to?
I think like maybe the best career advice I got was when I was in uni, and they said like, don't think about your career as a pathway from A to Z. Like, think about it as this, like from A to B to C to D, and take the opportunities that come up and like honor your curiosity and like what's making you feel like you're being drawn into a certain area and is keeping you excited, and take it one step at a time. And so probably that's maybe more that, as opposed to trying to chase this big prestigious or status or, thing that you think is going to make you happy. Just follow the things that you actually are finding making you happy.
take it one step at a time, lead with curiosity, and be really attuned to what's making you happy along the way. I wanted to end out on a few questions that I've stolen this idea from Brene Brown, where she does that rapid fire in the end. It's always my favorite part of every episode.
Go for it.
If you didn't have to work, what would you be doing with your time?
Probably I would just work on my house.
Second one, if you had to do one of your past jobs for the rest of your life, which one would you choose?
Yeah, the one at Procter Gamble.
Awesome. And then I would say the same thing, and then we can be there together, traveling the world, doing cool stuff and being obnoxious. Third one, if you could get a do-over for one career decision, which one would it be?
Yeah, nothing. I feel pretty good about my decisions, actually.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of career advice, what would you say?
You're right about Nicolette. The dream is to find a way to work together again, and you'll do it. Just be patient. And you will convince her to move to Australia and everything will be beautiful.
Amazing. Love it. Agreed with that answer. Probably, I don't know if there was subliminal influencing happening over the last 10 years, but there we go. Made the dream a reality. All right. Last one. Complete this sentence. When I grow up.
I hope I'm proud of the things I've done.
Beautiful. Let's leave it there. I'm so proud of you, girl. I love you. And thank you for having this conversation.
Thanks so much for having me and for asking those great questions. I'm excited to hear how other people, I know you've got some absolute crackers lined up, answer them too.
Yeah, it's just amazing when I started reaching out to people, how many amazing women we have in our network, and that's just willing to share the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.